This is a Space Marine. But it's not just any old Space Marine. In my opinion, this is the Space Marine. It's a veteran of 30 years and is the perfect representation of what he's meant to be. He's stripped down to the absolute basics, no extra details, nothing fancy. But it's an instantly recognisable silhouette to anyone in the hobby. At a glance, you know exactly what he is. There's a reason why even now a life-size version of this miniature still stands outside Warhammer World in Nottingham. It's iconic. This particular Space Marine was painted in the early 90s by an 11 or 12-year-old me. I bought the second edition box set of Warhammer 40,000 with my saved up pocket money, and the 20 Marines in that box were the first miniatures I ever painted. Under that thick layer of 90s blood red paint, there's an even thicker layer of red enamel paint. No one told me I had to thin the paints. There was no YouTube, no tutorials, you had to figure this stuff out for yourself. It's not a great paint job, but at the time I was very happy with it, and it did exactly what I needed it to do, to be a Blood Angel Space Marine when I put him on the table to play a game with my friends. Now he sits here at the top of the paint rack on my desk. He acts as a reminder of what can be achieved with practice and perseverance. There's currently a challenge that's been set on Instagram to paint one of these old Space Marines, and I decided to give it a go. It seemed like a fun little project. I didn't want to strip the paint from my Marine because I'm quite attached to him, but I was very kindly sent one from a friend I know on Discord, and here he is. It looks like he was once an Ultramarine, still showing some of the blue paint left behind. I set about cleaning him up, removing any mould lines and getting him ready to have an update. I primed him black, and then gave him a zenithal highlight of grey sear, and then one more from above with just pure white. I made the decision early on to try and paint a Blood Angel to compare it to my old Marine, and to do my best to replicate the box art that I know my 11-year-old self was trying to do. I used Blood Angel's red contrast paint through an airbrush to slowly build up a nice bright red, keeping the recesses darker and leaving some nice natural looking shadows. Next I made a thin glaze of Evil Sunz Scarlet, and I applied this to all the raised areas on the armour to really brighten him up and give him some nice contrast to the darker shaded areas. And here he is, looking all nice and vibrant. He was looking a little flat, so I then started shading the armour to bring out the details. I used a thin mix of black and corn red and carefully applied it to all the recesses. You can really start to see the details popping out now. The next step was to apply some Black Legion contrast paint. I applied this to all of the areas that needed to be black and everywhere that I would later paint in metallic. I did 2 thin coats to make sure none of the red showed through. And here he is, already at a nice tabletop standard. I used some grey sear to block in the skull on his helmet and the wings on the chest Aquila. Trying to keep with the retro 90s look, I used Bad Moon Yellow for the Aquila on the chest and the bolter. This is a really good bright yellow contrast paint and definitely helped with the 90s look I was going for. To add some shade into the yellow, I gave it a thin layer of Iyanden Yellow, which is another contrast paint, and also gave it a quick highlight of Phalanx Yellow. Now the red armour needed to be finished. I used some Wild Rider Red to carefully edge highlight everything. This was quite an easy process compared to the modern Marines I'm used to painting now. This guy has no extra details, just the absolute basics needed, so highlighting the red took no time at all. To help brighten him up even more, I then added a second highlight on the most raised points by adding some orange into the Wild Rider Red. I think this orange really helped with the 90s aesthetic. I used some blue on the chest gem that will never be seen again after the bolter is glued in place, but I'll know it's there. I then carefully painted in the eyes using Caliban green. I actually highlighted the eyes off camera as I was finding it far too difficult with the camera in the way and I didn't want to mess it up. I then gave all of the black a highlight using Dark Reaper. I did this across all of the armour and the bolter, and finished this up with the second highlight of Fenrisian Grey to add some more shine to it. He was almost finished now. I filled in all of the metallic bits on the bolt gun and the power pack using Ironbreaker and gave them a quick shade using some Nuln Oil. All that was left was the base. I knew that he needed to have a green base, but as I don't happen to have any 30-year-old Goblin green lying around, I went through my paint collection and found Warboss green, which turns out is a pretty good match. I gave the base a couple of coats of this and then gave it a quick dry brush with a really bright yellow. I added a few decals from a modern transfer sheet, keeping the same markings I remember from the 90s box art. A yellow blood drip on one shoulder, the Blood Angel's chapter symbol on the other, and a white skull on his right knee pad. I applied these with some Microsol to get a nice painted on look and gave him an all over coat with some satin varnish. And here he is, all finished. I'm so pleased with how he came out. It's not the greatest paint job in the world, and it won't win me a golden demon, but putting him next to my marine that I painted as a child, it's such a great thing to be able to see the improvement in what I'm able to do. This was a really great little project to work on and brought back a lot of memories. He's now going to join his brother up here on the shelf, and to be a reminder to not give up if I'm struggling to paint something, and to always persevere and to improve. Let me know in the comments if you've ever owned one of these marines. I'm sure that most of us have at some point. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all soon.